blood. Obviously, these are drawing on the 10 plagues in Egypt. And then there's a destruction of the thirds. And then there's the sea turning to blood and stars falling from heaven and the sun and the moon and heavenly constellations smitten and darkened and wormwood. These are all words and images that already appeared and occurred in the Tanakh. So over and over again, what we see in the book of Revelation are images and personalities and symbols that are basically copied and pasted, or at least inspired from the books of the Tanakh. And they make appearances here in the book of Revelation. So I think it's important when we're going through this book just to keep that in mind, that without the Tanakh, I think it's impossible to imagine that there would have been a book like this. Now in verse 2, the text says that I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Now, I've gone through a lot of different Christian translations here, and virtually all of them, actually all of the ones that I looked at, translate this as 7 trumpets that were given to these angels. But if you go to David Stern's Jewish New Testament commentary, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, he insists that these are not trumpets. He insists that these should be shofars. They should be referred to as a shofar, because he says, this is his argument, he says that in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, the end times prophecies of the Tanakh basically speak about the sounding of the shofar. So for example, in the book of Zechariah, chapter 9, verses 14 to 16, again, it's speaking about some traumatic experiences in the end times, times of judgment. It speaks about the sounding of the shofar. And you see the same kind of imagery about the sounding of the shofar in Isaiah chapter 27, verse 13, and in the prophet Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 16. So what David Stern argues is because there's this image already of the sounding of a shofar before the end times, during times of judgment and destruction. So he says that these angels are not going to be blowing trumpets. What would be more appropriate, he says, is that they'd be blowing shofars. But again, virtually every single Christian commentary that I've seen translates this as 7 trumpets. Now, what's interesting is that in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures, these are very, very different instruments, so to speak. So you'll see, for example, the shofar comes up frequently in the Torah. You see it, for example, at Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 19, verse 16, that there's a sounding of the shofar at the revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And then you see at the coming of the Yovel, the Jubilee year, the 50th year in the cycle of years. We see this in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 9 and 10. Also, it's signaled by the blowing of a shofar. We know, of course, that the shofar, which is again usually an animal horn, ram's horn, so the shofar is sounded for the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. You see this in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 24, and Numbers chapter 29, verse 1. And then we have another instance where the shofar is blown, the ram's horn is blown when the people of Israel are conquering the city of Jericho in the beginning of the book of Joshua, chapter 6, verse 4.